good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Tuesday Night Live, brought to you by CrowCast here. Very strange feeling with the Crows out of contention for the season, but still lots to talk about. And joining me this evening is Peter J. How you going, Peter?
Good, mate. How are you tonight?
Very well. And Donkey, how are you, mate?
Good, mate. Good to be with you and all the loyal listeners out at home, wherever they are.
Wherever they are. And, of course, we have Nikki on with us tonight. How you going, Nikki?
Back on Tuesday nights.
Back on Tuesday nights, but getting the band back together. We're not sure where Macca is. Hopefully he's feeling okay. Obviously he had his eye surgery a couple of weeks ago, so whether he's feeling a little bit under the weather, I'm not sure. But if you're listening in, Macca...
he just forgot.
Well, that's a possibility. He is a very old man. But Nikki, what we'll do this evening is Macca does a sweets and smacks later on in the show, so you might just want to take the cockwomble hat off and put the Macca's sweets and smacks hat on for later on.
Well, we still need the cockwomble.
Yeah,
because there's definitely some nominees this week.
Definitely.
But if we do that, we've got to start now, don't we?
Yeah.
True.
In the meantime, let's get right into it with a bit of Crows news, shall we?
Well, the big news, I guess, coming out of the Crows this week has been the appointment of Marty Mattner. It was a bit of a funny one. The Sturt Football Club gave a press release on Monday morning and got ahead of the Crows a little bit, but they caught up by about 11 o'clock in the morning and released the news. So it was a really, really good appointment, I think. Obviously, two flags with the Blues, been to Sydney, development coach there, great record on the field as well. So I think that's been a good pickup for us. I think that in terms of the Crows, that's really the main news that we've had this week. Was everyone happy with that appointment?
Very much so. Oh, the one thing I liked is that there's the little stat of he's won a premiership as a player in the SANFL and as a coach, and he's won a premiership in the AFL as a player. So, come on, Marty. We just need that other one so you can get the nice little set going there.
Fiend, you're a blue man. What do you think?
Yeah, well, you can't have too many Sturt people on board, in my opinion, Pete. But you know, every report you hear from the Sturt Football Club and previously from Sydney and obviously from Adelaide in the past has all been very positive about Marty, and he's a people person and he's a very good communicator, and he brings people along. So my main hope with Marty is they actually utilise his strengths and not just having, you know, sitting there as a line coach without much other input. I hope they actually use his experience and his strengths, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship.
No, agreed, mate. I'll throw one in for Macca. I couldn't agree more. That would be like we'd like to see it go. So, particularly after losing Josh Franco in the circumstances that we did, we hope that, as you say, that he's given a good opportunity there to show his wares. Not a lot of other Crows news about it. It's been reasonably quiet. There has been a little bit of a few ripplings about CM and the AFL investigation. That's still, I think, ongoing. There seemed to be a little bit of backing off in the media over the last week or so. So I think everyone's just backing off now and waiting for the AFL integrity unit to do their investigation and let us know what is going to happen. So that's reasonably quiet as well. There's been a little bit of other news going around with player movement. Dan Hanbury has just come out, I think late today, and said that he's now formally requesting a trade from Sydney. So that will be an interesting one to watch. I think it was only across the last week that Lachie Neale came out and said that he wanted to trade up to Brisbane. That seems to be the word. A couple of reasonably big midfield names on the move. And
Geelong also fairly heavily into Luke Dowhouse as well, So apparently that's been for a couple of years now that they've been into him, and even enlisted Dangerfield to quietly court him over the last few months. So Geelong certainly will be looking to trade in, I think, considering they don't have much in the way of draft picks, but you wonder what their currency is going to be. They've delisted, they delisted like about 11 players or something, didn't they?
Well, wasn't there 6 today or something?
8, I think it was.
8.
Oh, there we go, yeah.
Yep.
Well, the thing is that there were also little rumours about Danger apparently using him to also kind of trying to get Jack Steele from St Kilda.
Jack Stephen.
Jack Stevens. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, there's too many Jacks there. And it's like, I'm with you, Phoenix. How are they going to do this? Because they actually have to trade players out. And if they've delisted all these players, what are they going to... Why would you bother trading for a player that's been delisted? I just think it seems a bit ridiculous on Geelong's part there.
There's one player there that looks to possibly be on the move, and he's related to the Lachie Neale trade, that being Lincoln McCarthy. Apparently he is a very close friend of Neale, and Brisbane are looking to get him up there as well as a kind of a, reunite the friends and make that a bit better deal for Lachie to look at. So that was a little bit of news going around as well, that he could be one player, but I wouldn't imagine he would command too much by the way of a return draft pick. So I think the only player perhaps of interest that was delisted today was Corey Gregson, who I'm not sure what happened to Corey. He burst onto the scene a couple of years ago as a small forward and looked like he was going to take the world by storm. I think he's a South Australian lad, and just hasn't been able to sustain the effort.
Yep, he was in my son's year at Sacred Heart, and he did burst onto the scene, Pete, so it'll be interesting to see whether there is any interest in him. I think he got probably overtaken by a couple of blokes there, Cockatoo, and more recently probably Tim Kelly, in that sort of small mid sort of role, forward mid sort of role. So I don't know, but he's a good young kid, so hopefully he gets another opportunity. Yeah.
He's only 22. He's only a young lad. I'm not sure if he's had any injury or whether it was just form or just not quite able to keep his place. But he may be, as a delisted player, he may be of some interest to the Adelaide clubs.
Oh, look, Port will pick him up. they like picking up, the people on the scrap heap, don't they? The missing links, yeah, God. No more word on Pollock either. That's gone a bit quiet.
That's gone very quiet, yep.
I thought I saw on one of the Facebook pages today that he's locked in for North at $3.75 over 5 years. And the sticking point for Port was they didn't want to give him 5 years.
Yeah, it's an extra, $700,000 with an extra year, so... Yeah. I don't know. Good on him, I guess, for landing someone, but I don't know whether I'd pay that for Pollock, would you?
Well, it's an extraordinary situation at Port Adelaide when you've got a player who will probably finish, he will probably win their club champion or be at worst in the top 3. He's had a very good year, and it's extraordinary that they are not going to be able to keep him. And they've got, all of these players running around on fat, contracts, Watts, Motlop, Rockcliffe, Dixon, all of these guys that they've brought in over the last, 3, 4, 5 years. And then you've got Polak, who was another guy they traded in. And they're going to lose him because they can't afford to. It's not. I suspect that it's not just that they can't match; that they can't get in the ballpark. A lot of those players. I mean, he was a player that came back to Adelaide because he was homesick. So you would imagine if they could have got into the ballpark, he probably would have stayed. But obviously, they're not even close.
Well, and the irony is, and probably the black mark on Port's recruiting has been that Pollock is exactly the type of player they can't afford to lose. They have so many inside grunt midfielders. They need some silk on the outside. And bringing in Rockcliffe, I think, for them has been a real mistake. I certainly rated Rockcliffe when he was in Brisbane. But he really was the wrong type of player for them, and it's almost as if they got a sniff that the Crows were interested, or apparently interested at some stage, and they've just gone harder. And so you've got to maintain some sort of balance in your list. And at the moment, Port's list looks so imbalanced. They lack quality in defence, and they lack some outside pace. And Dixon really is a one-man band up forward, and they're slowly killing his career just by kicking it on his head all the time. So I really don't understand the method to Port's madness with regards to their recruiting over the last 5 years, and now they're reaping what they sow with Pollock, I reckon.
Indeed.
And it's going to come back double kicking them in the bum when in 2 to 3 years' time, all those draft picks that they've traded away to get these blokes that are going to be expiring and on fat contracts and force other people out, they're going to double crash.
Yeah,
Yep.
It was really poor, and we've talked about this, I think, over the past 2 years, that their trading in just seems ridiculous. They go for the quick fix, but they go for the quick fix with the wrong type of players. And the fact that Pollock was he was a Port Adelaide boy because he grew up supporting that club. That was the whole thing. We might have been interested in him, but he was not interested in going to anybody but Port Adelaide. They then bring in Voss, and there's long been rumours that was an issue up there with him in Brisbane, that he didn't get on with Voss, who was his head coach at the time. They then bring him in. They then extend Voss's contract here, and Pollock's going, okay, fine, I'm out. I did see somebody, though, kind of mentioned that his wedding, that there's absolutely no Port players invited to it.
That was bizarre, wasn't it? And apparently,
I don't know how true that is.
Apparently, none of them
that's
invited to his engagement party either.
No. And he was best buddies with Brodie Smith, but since he actually came back, that kind of hasn't. They'd kept in touch, but I don't. They definitely. I think Brodie kind of dumped him for Laddie, but that seems to have gone quite sour as well. So yeah, don't know what's going on there.
The other bit of news I just wanted to bring up was if you're looking at movers and shakers for the upcoming draft. Did anybody catch Connor Rosie's game on Sunday for North Adelaide against Sturt? He had 24 possessions, 10 marks, 4 rebound 50s, a couple of inside 50s, and he was very, very good. I hadn't seen him play fully before, but he really, really shone, and he is in the draft charts with a bullet, and would be very, very surprised if he lasts past pick 10. He
bit us on the bum a bit, Pete, us as in Sturt, and look, not only that, I wasn't overly impressed with Lukosius so far in the final series, and I think it just goes to show that if you put the 4 big South Aussies in the frame, you can't go wrong with any 2 of them, really. Haitley for the Bulldogs is equally a fantastic young player. Connor had a great game on the weekend, was really influential. And we know what Lukosius can do, and obviously we know what Isaac Rankin's skills and abilities are as well. So all this hand-wringing about trying to get Jack Lukosius, I still maintain that it may not actually fit our list profile. Ironically, just talking about Port and the way they've managed their list, we may well decide that Rankin and one of Haitley and Rosie is going to be just as good for us.
Yeah, we may well. It's going to be very, very interesting. Very interesting to watch how that draft plays out, and also it's going to be a very interesting trade period as well to see how we can, because I suspect that we're not going to be looking unless other than potentially a ruckman. And I know that they're talking about. I've heard some rumours about Bruce and potentially and Rory Lobb and potentially trying to attract a ruckman. But I think that other than that, I can't imagine us getting involved in any player trading other than to get ourselves up the draft order. So I think that that I would imagine will be our strategy, and so it'll be interesting to see where we end up at the end of trade period and what picks we've got.
Yeah, and then, of course, you've got live trading to factor in as well this season, which is going to make the draft very, very interesting to see how that plays out. At the moment, it's hard to really picture how that's all going to work, but you can just imagine that there's so many different strategies played out on whiteboards all over the country in every AFL club. All these different connotations and what-if scenarios, and if you're a recruiting manager at the moment, you're really earning your stripes, I reckon. And I think really too, one of the key areas that the AFL competition is going to grow is in this talent identification, and I think I actually like the fact that there's live trading in the draft this year, and a few more opportunities to mess around, because there'll be some Moneyball pickups this year, I reckon, because it's that deeper draft, and it probably bats down to really about 35 before it starts to taper off.
That young lad from North Woodcock was being talked about as a rookie pick, and he had 20-odd disposals and kicked a couple of... One snag in particular was a cracking goal.
Yeah. There's a lot of quality around. Valenti from North as well is a quality kid, under-18 captain.
McAdam from your boys.
Yep.
Looks to be... There's a lot of them around.
Yep. So it's going to be... And a lot of these blokes are going to go under the radar a little bit, because not all of them got invited... or not all of them got picked up in this state squad.
State team.
Yep.
Yeah.
Some of them didn't make it, and they've had good back ends of the season. So very interesting to see how across the South Australian talent Victoria is, because I think it's probably the strongest year age group that we've had for a very, very, very long time, not only in the top 10 or 15, but also down the order a bit.
Indeed.
What else you got, Pete? The Crows picked up about 630,482 ambassadors.
Did we?
Haven't heard that one.
No, we appointed 11 new ambassadors. 11.
Do we know who they are?
Yeah, it's listed on the AFC website, and they're all from marginalised backgrounds, I guess, or from people who represent marginalised backgrounds. We've got the African Women's Federation represented, we've got Relationships Australia, we've got the Hungarian community, we've got Anglicare, we've got the Australian Refugee Association. What do you reckon that's all about? We're trying to pick up around the edges, aren't we? Or?
No. I think that would tie in with a lot of our community work we've been doing.
Well, we do have...
They're trying to mine different, more diverse sectors of the community, I suspect, and trying to sort of branch out from their rusted-on sort of membership and those that they would normally, attract into the world of supporting an AFL football club, and they're going for more, diverse. And I'd imagine as particularly if they're giving ambassadorships to refugee organisations, then people that are landing in Adelaide, they probably get a badge and a Crows badge and a Crows kit and bag as soon as they get off the plane.
That's where that ties in with a lot of that multicultural push and the academies, etc., that the AFL are doing. Just looking at the list of where they're from here, I do know that we do some work with things like Anglicare, South Australia, and Relationships Australia. Those other ones, so you've got the Crows Next Generation Academy, so somebody who's already working in there, and that the multicultural program that AFL is pushing. So that's where you tap into the Refugee Association, etc. So to me, it's a smart move.
Well, we do have a dedicated multicultural liaison officer now too. So
yeah, because that's what it is. They will attend match day events, assist with the club's multicultural strategy and initiatives, and support the club at a community level. I've got no problem with those.
The reality is that they're not going to grow this game overseas. It's not going to happen, and I don't think. And so I guess they're in terms of growth strategy, they've got to continue to look within Australia, and I suppose that they've and that's why they're trying to get into Greater Western Sydney and the Gold Coast and these sort of places, and I guess that would be part of the growth strategy, an internal growth strategy, if you like, or a domestic growth strategy, rather than spending dollars in places like China, which is a total waste of money and time.
Well, yeah, I mean, you only have to look at the number of kids from African refugee kids that are actually coming through the SNFL ranks. You look at what Alia's been able to do in Sydney this year. There's a hell of a lot of athletic talent there, and if you can grab them early on and get them away from soccer, which is where a lot of those kids are focused on, because it's such a huge sport back in Africa.
Yeah,
do it.
I think it really is a heart and mind thing, isn't it? And you're right, Pete. I think it's one of the things that the Crows has done really well over the last 12 to 18 months is really try to expand the supporter base and the reach, I guess, with the brand. And a lot of people will thumb their nose at Legacy Esports or the baseball club or whatever, but they're not huge spends by the club, and they are proactive in terms of trying to broaden their reach, and you can't really criticise them for that.
Yeah. Is there an all-pair ambassador as well? Oh.
Yeah,
sounds like we're hitting all the same markets.
I think
there's no French or Mexican.
Once Peter Dutton gets a flick, he'll get picked up.
Yeah, and we're not into the polo ponies either.
Yeah, no worries. And no away games in Nauru. That's the only two. I've got.
The other thing too is we had a couple of re-signings too, Pete, during the week. We had Benny Davis, Lockie Murphy, and Patrick Wilson all getting extensions.
Yeah, of course, that was good news. I was really pleased for Ben Davis. I'm a big fan, and I'm not going to stick my neck out like I would with Elliot Himmelberg, but there is certainly some talent there, and if he can harness that and put in a good pre-season, then his upside is huge, and really impressed with Lockie Murphy's year this year for a kid coming off the rookie list. For as young as he is, he's only 19 years old. And I thought for his first season of AFL football, I thought he was terrific this year.
Couldn't agree more, Pete. Couldn't agree more on Murphy. It was just so exciting to watch. I figure I've got to pick up the drinking game for everyone now.
Yeah, it's going to be a dry argument otherwise, isn't it?
Gee, Burton's a dickhead, isn't he?
I do have to agree with Pete. We've both been quite strong on Himmelberg and on Davis. Davis just, unfortunately, his injuries haven't kind of helped him. I think he's struggled a little bit at that level of just getting that body consistently right. But he did come to us and he had an injury issue, so we knew exactly what we were getting. But there's some really nice tricks he's got. He's not as tall as McGovern, but he does that same similar kind of, he's quick, he's got a great leap, he's a real contested kind of ball winner in the air, or at least he tries to.
Nikki, if you know as well as I, if that kid gets his career off the ground, he will be an absolute rolling highlight reel.
Oh, God, yes.
Now, Jay MacMac's a good point in the Spreaker chat. And g'day to everyone in Spreaker and on Facebook joining us today. That Matner, because I guess the only re-signing that I was a little bit curious about was Paddy Wilson. And J Mac makes the point rightly that it'll be a reuniting of Paddy Wilson and Marty Matner at the Crows. I'm a little bit confused by how they see Patrick Wilson, or where they see him, or as a mature age recruit, where his development lies. Do you guys have any thoughts on Paddy Wilson?
I have no knowledge of this, but I'm just going to take a guess. I think that Cam Ellis-Yolman will want to trade, and I think he'll probably go. And I suspect that Patrick Wilson was given another year. Was it a year or two?
One, I think.
I reckon he's probably been given. He's been given another year to anchor that midfield in the sandfall, and if he develops, then well and good. But he's a body in the with Cam Ellis-Yolman going. I think that he's sort of a big body depth player. That's as I see it. That's my guess.
Yeah, I can't quite see how many he got, but it would have been an extra year, you would have thought. And you're probably right, Pete.
Yeah,
although
they're on the rookie list.
Yeah.
with Murphy and Wilson, so you presume that's only a single year.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind betting Lockie Murphy gets upgraded, actually, depending on how our list structure ends up. But I must admit I was a little bit surprised that Paddy stayed on the list, but given your thoughts on Cam Ellis-Yeoman, and I tend to agree with you again without any real knowledge on the situation, Pete, then that makes sense, doesn't it?
I think with Cam, we've got this currency for him. I do think that Pike actually does like him, but unfortunately we can't play him, we can't play Hugh, we can't play Matt Crouch all in there together, unfortunately, and I think Cam deserves a go at AFL level, and unfortunately, if it's going to be sad if it isn't with us, but I would really love him to continue his career on it, at least somewhere. I've really liked Wilson in the SANFL because every time he comes off the ground, he is utterly spent. He gives everything when he is out there. We did see that where we used him when we put him in the Hawthorn game is we actually used him on the wing. So that'll be interesting as to whether we use him as a wing rotation and then into the midfield, if that's where they're seeing it.
Look, I don't know.
Yeah,
it looked like they were playing
agree with
him
you
out
on-
of position.
Absolutely agree with you on Cam Ellis-Yeoman, Nicky. I would always been a fan, and I would, and I know that. Actually, just second thoughts on that, Fiend. We did hear Treaders dropped a rumour, didn't he, saying that Cam was looking to be traded out. So that might have been in my subconscious, but I genuinely hope that he finds a home and he gets an opportunity to carve out a career, because he's not, he'd only be mid-20s. He's not an old man. He could still have 100 games left in him. So I hope that happens.
He has had. This was his second knee, or was it his third?
Second, I think.
Because when we first picked him up, we picked him up on the back of a knee reconstruction. So we actually sat out that first year.
Mm.
I reckon he's a prime trade value adder for us if we're trying to get up the draft.
I think so.
Whether a St Kilda would give a St Kilda the Melbourne pick and him and we take theirs or something like that. So I actually think that's where we'll use him.
Yep.
And I think the Saints are a good match for him too.
And I don't think that, all things being equal, I really can't see Wilson playing league football next year. But, if we cop some injuries like we did this year, then maybe.
Yeah, but that's why I want Cheney on the list. You need, or I'm very happy for us to possibly give Otten another year on the proviso that you're going to spend most of the year in the SANFL, but when they step up, you're going to get a good AFL performance out of them.
Yep.
And that's what you need on your list.
Yep.
Yeah, interesting that we haven't had any news on Kyle Cheney yet.
Other than we know that he was in dispute with the club over his contract, but hopefully that will go away. And I'm a big fan of Kyle Cheney. I think he's a good footballer. So
I agree.
I'd be hoping he stays.
I agree. He stepped in and did a job seamlessly for us this year, and we would have been worse without him.
Absolutely.
Couldn't agree more.
I think that might be it for news. What do you reckon? We'll move on to maybe the finals played. There was some finals last week.
There was one.
We weren't running, but a few clubs were.
Well, you're right, Nicky. There was one final, and if you're alluding to what I think you're alluding to, there was one good game of footy on Saturday night, and the rest of it was putrid.
I turned off the other three.
Absolutely,
I got bored.
Putrid. The Melbourne Geelong game was just one of the most god awful games of football you'll ever see, and Sydney GWS not much better, and. Richmond Hawthorn was predictable. All the results were fairly predictable, really. Other than the fact, I know that the one that I missed was I thought Collingwood might get up over there. They were brave, but they didn't quite get the bickies. Although I thought they played pretty well, and that was actually a really entertaining game of football.
Yeah. I West Coast is surprising me. I thought they'd fall off the boil a bit when Nick Nat went down, and then when they lost, the Boston Brawler, and they're surprising me. They've just got people pulling from all over the place, so it's really good to see those guys buy, because it's just it's good to have a couple of non-Victorian teams still pumping.
I think we've kind of seen that Danger doesn't do well in finals. He's just proved that. I sat and watched him live at our Hawthorn final, and he's just not interested. He was not interested in chasing. His player will get a break, and then he'll go, "Oh, I have to put in," but it's a pretend put in. And so many times I saw that again in that Melbourne Geelong game. If they didn't have Tim Kelly out of there, they would have been. Him and Ablett kept them in the game. Apart from Melbourne missing. If they didn't have those two players out there, I mean, the fact that Ablett had a go at Selwood for doing something stupid, I quite enjoyed that.
I reckon Chris Scott's in a bit of trouble next season. He's won a premiership, obviously, but that was on the back of a squad built by Bomber Thompson. And he hasn't done
he didn't coach.
Yeah, exactly. And he hasn't done a hell of a lot since, and they've done some Port Power style recruiting with Henderson and a couple of others, and Ablett and whatnot, and haven't really made that squad any better. In fact, probably imbalanced it, if anything. Hawkins not getting any younger, lacking down back, Harry Taylor on the way out. I reckon they're in strife, and I reckon Chris Scott might be under the pump next year if they don't lift.
Yeah, PJ Crowe's pointed out, he just got a 2-year extension.
Yeah, I don't think that means anything.
You absolutely read my mind, Fina, and I was just thinking that very, very same thing when we were talking about Port Adelaide. I was sitting here thinking to myself, Geelong, not that much different the way that they've gone. They're two teams which seem to think that that there's no need to spend too much time at the draft, and that you're better off chucking your draft picks around, trying to top up on experienced players. And they are two teams that, to me, really have not hit the draft to any kind of success in the last probably, 2 to 5 years, I suppose.
I agree, and I think Pete, that they're not even the best examples of doing it right. Whereas you look at someone like Hawthorn, who's probably traded away a few of their early picks, but they've picked up blokes like Mitchell and O'Meara, so they put basically A graders straight back in. Whereas if you're just picking up fringe players or lower end 22, then what's the point in giving away those picks?
Yeah, true.
Do you reckon there's any coincidence? Go on, Nick.
That they spruik about their recruiting manager, about how good he is.
Yeah,
because he got them Selwood and all these other ones. It's like, father-son picks.
I was going to say,
help from the AFL.
Them and the Bulldogs both benefited from father-sons. Do you reckon there's any coincidence that both Port Adelaide and Geelong are very sensitive about their memberships? I mean, Geelong have just had a massive refurbishment of that stadium. And need to fill it in an area where socio-economic downturn has been experienced, and you've got Port, who have been scratching for numbers, since probably 2014, really. And it just strikes me as interesting that both those clubs seem to have gone for the Band-Aid approach and try to keep themselves up into the 8. And Chris Scott coming out again recently and saying, there's no value in bottoming out and getting picks because it's such a long turnaround that may not come to fruition. I just wonder whether there's some external pressure on that recruiting department to keep trying to at least maintain that competitiveness.
In the Cats' defence, at least they were rebuilding a machine that had actually just won some premierships. So, there's investing in that machine, trying to keep it ticking rather than rebuilding it's got more merit than what Port did, which is try to reinvest the machine that was proven to go nowhere. There's
also another nice parallel in that you've got both the premiers of the states at the time were massive supporters of both of those teams and provided a lot of government funding to them. So the redevelopment at Geelong was pushed entirely by the government of Victoria at that time, who had a Geelong supporter as their premier. And we know the the assistance that was given to Port Adelaide and all the spruiking that was being done, that if you vote for certain people, then we get to upgrade our own facilities, etc., and things like that. So I think there's another layer of pressure in that you're getting government funding. You have to put runs on the board.
Oh, I think the three marginal states in Geelong got them their money, but yeah, anyway, different story, different day.
Yeah, a little bit of that, but there's it's that nice, that feel good story of we're helping them out kind of thing, aren't we? Nice.
Yeah.
The other interesting half of that equation on Friday night was Melbourne. I'd be interested what your thoughts are, because speaking of teams that we compare to Port Adelaide, they just seem to remind me a little bit of the Port Adelaide of 5 or 6 years ago when they made that prelim final. They're a team that kind of don't do a lot for 3.5 quarters, but they seem to just each game be able to manage a burst where they're completely and utterly unstoppable, and they manage to be able to sort of bang on 5 or 7 goals. I know I've spoke about this through the season when we were talking about Melbourne, and they're just this burst team that, and you never know when it's going to come. It might come in the first quarter or the second or third or the last, but they just seem to be able to pull out a 5 or 6 goal burst every game, and it just seems to be enough for them to sit on that and then and get a winner. Just seemed to be how it played out. Anyone think that they could potentially go all the way? I certainly don't think so, but any other thoughts?
They work hard, Pete, and I think that the notable thing about Melbourne this year is that they're not falling behind, and you're right, they do have those bursts during games, but they rarely find themselves 5 or 6 goals down in a match this season. So they're always sort of in the hunt, and when they do get it on a bit of a tear and Oliver gets off the chain, and they've benefited certainly from Jack Viney coming in. That was a very good gamble by Melbourne Selection Committee. Look, I reckon they make a prelim. I think they're almost, along with Richmond, the form side of the final series.
I think my problem with Melbourne though is that they still, whilst they keep pushing, pepper and pepper the goals, etc., they do get those long runs where they just kick points. And if you are going up against somebody like Richmond who do supply that maniac pressure again, I think they may get slightly blown away in that instance with a team like that. That's my problem with Melbourne, is that they're finishing. So whilst you're right about that whole push, the pressure that they do, etc., there's still a bit of a mess up forward at times.
Well, I thought that from a finals football point of view, I thought that one of the teams that impressed me most over the weekend was GWS. I don't know if you caught that game.
Yeah.
But they played a real finals brand of football. It was tough, it was uncompromising, and it was relentless. And they just seem to me to have developed a bit harder edge than what they've had in previous years. And they got a couple of really good players back. Again, Feen, as you said, same as Melbourne, they took a punt on a few players coming back in. And I just thought they look like a really, really determined outfit.
Yeah, agree with that, Pete. Sorry, go
and
Donkey.
And they lost a player early on.
Well, not a player, a bloody champion.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Donkey?
Oh, I was going to say that I think they've had to fight a lot harder this year than they had the last couple of years to get to where they are. And I think you're right about that harder edge and busting your way through packs and busting your way through the competition to get to where you are is a lot tougher than it is to sort of sail at the front, I think, sometimes. And they're not going to get as much stage fright in a prelim final as they probably had in the last couple of ones. So, and they've just got top quality cattle. And
if they get to another one, Donk, this will be their third prelim in a row.
Yeah.
And so you think that they would have had to have learned something, and they'll cop Richmond again. They're on the Richmond side of the draw. So they'll cop Richmond at the MCG. The difference, though, this year is that they'll go and play Collingwood at the MCG this week. So they'll have a game on the MCG, against a hostile crowd. There won't be a lot of difference in terms of playing Collingwood and Richmond. So they'll have that almost like a dress rehearsal for that big prelim final. And I don't know, I just got a funny feeling they might have a bit of a shout.
I think it's down to personnel for them. I mean, they, along with us, they've probably been the hardest hit with injuries this year, not just numbers but quality. And losing Kelly, and the signs, he's going to have an arthroscope tomorrow, or he had one today. I'm not quite sure, but
they've listed him as the test.
Yeah, you'd have to suggest that. Yeah, he'd be hard pressed to get up this week, even if the knees are right. Getting up in 2 days from an arthroscope, it's he's going to have some pain there, and I mean the inclusion of Toby Green is an excellent one. I think he's very underrated in terms of the influence he has. He's a bit of X factor for them. But you're right, Pete. They were very, very solid, and they poleaxed Sydney. Like Sydney are hardened finals campaigners, and they smashed them.
Yeah.
What do we think about Richmond?
But it was the slowness of that Sydney midfield. They just did not want to run and chase. There was the commentators kept going, "Oh, Buddy needs to do this, and the forwards need to do that." And I'm watching the game, just going, "No, their midfielders need to pull their frickin' finger out." That's what lost Sydney the game. They were not interested, or they couldn't go with GWS's midfield. I think they've fallen off a cliff. I think they'll fall even further next year.
Well, it's a question of depth, I think, for Sydney. There's another team that sold the farm for a few players over the last couple of years, and I think they lack midfield depth. Hanbury has had a troubled season. Lukey Parker's been very inconsistent. They've got obviously Isaac Heaney, who's just a star, but they don't have a lot of depth in that midfield rotation, and they've got some good workhorses in the back half of their 22, but not anyone that's going to shoot the lights out. So I think you're right, Nick. But we write Sydney off at our peril because they just keep bouncing back every season.
Do. Fane, you were going to ask about Richmond. I saw that game as well. That just looked to me like every other Richmond Thursday night MCG Richmond game I've seen for about the last year and a half.
Yep.
Hawthorn annoyed the hell out of me.
I was very surprised with how how Richmond were able to subdue. Oh, exactly right, Nicky. Hawthorn played with no freedom whatsoever. A couple of their champs were down. Yep, agree.
Burgoyne did not want to put his body in. I think he got a hit early on and then just went, nope. And he pulled out of a couple of contests that we've seen him go in for before. And like weave and extract that ball out and deliver it with class. And he was just like, no, okay, you can get it and run away. The ball wasn't bouncing Hawthorn's way. That kind of, you have one of those games where nothing's going your way. You kind of anticipate and it just doesn't. And then the opposition team, they anticipate and it lands their way. But they were making poor decisions. They were waiting for somebody else to do things, or they were in two minds. It was very un-Hawthorn-like, and it just seemed that they got scared.
I think Hawthorn had of all the teams battling for spots in the 8, I think that Hawthorn, if my memory serves me correctly, had just about, or perhaps apart from Geelong in those last two games they had, over the last probably 6 or 7 weeks, had a reasonably comfortable run in.
Yeah, they did.
And I just wonder whether their fixture may have contributed to their lofty top 4 position, and whether they really are as good a team as what that position says it is.
I think it does show that the fixture plays a big part in the makeup of the final 8, because we've seen that the season itself is a war of attrition. And it depends very much on form coming in, the last 6 weeks coming into finals. And if you're a team that's been on, in that mid-6 fixture that can go either way, you can have a very soft run into the finals. And I think, who was it? There was a team last year that had a similar run. I can't remember who it was, but when you've got a fixture that doesn't have that play everyone once and then play your double ups after that, it can result in a very lopsided fixture. And I think you're right, Pete. I think Hawthorn did benefit from a very easy run over the last 6 weeks, and it may well have overstated their position. I certainly overestimated them. I actually thought they were the team that were going to give Richmond a run for their money, and they never looked like it.
Mm.
Never
But
mind.
to be fair, I think barely over the last over 12 months now, barely any teams look like giving Richmond a run for their money at the MCG. I think Geelong got close to them this year. That's probably about it.
Collingwood did as well until they had a few injuries. So I think Richmond would be very interesting.
Well, I think either of the co-tenants will give them a bit of a push because they will have their own home ground factor as well. Melbourne or Collingwood will give them a push. But if you're a Richmond player at the moment, you're riding on a fairly good wave of confidence, I reckon. You'd be feeling a little bit invincible.
Yeah, and they seem to do a really good rope-a-dope strategy too. They sort of wear you out and play a bit of keep you off in the first half and then massively come home with about a quarter and a bit to go.
You can just imagine the excitement in Melbourne at the prospect of a Richmond-Melbourne grand final for the traditionalists over there, and then it turns out that there's a West Coast GWS final. I reckon you'd get tickets for $50.
Yeah, you'd be able to walk up, I reckon.
I reckon you could walk up on the day, and I reckon you'd get into one of those posh tents for probably a couple of $100.
All those corporate tickets would be sold.
Oh, yeah.
But none of them, they would go for the drinks outside and none of them bother coming inside.
No.
They'll all stay outside.
There'll be a Royal Commission of the State of Football within about 2 minutes.
If that happened, if those two teams play the grand final, I'm going over for $500 and I reckon I'm getting into a tent.
Enjoy.
Now, speaking of West Coast, how did we rate their performance against Collingwood?
Oh, look, I thought it was a brilliant game of football. I don't know if you saw the game. It was a very exciting game, really good brand of football. And they were very, very good. I really thought that in the last quarter Collingwood had them.
So did I.
First half of the last quarter.
Yep, I really thought they had them. And when DeGoey kicked that goal that put them, I can't remember, maybe 1 or 2 goals up, I really thought then that was they'd go on with it. But to West Coast credit, Josh Kennedy had a big last quarter and Darling had a big last quarter. And
it was mostly actually McGovern. They finally managed to get McGovern away from Maine. And the way Collingwood were working quite well to keep McGovern either honest or out of the play.
Yep.
He finally managed to get little bits of breaks, and he was doing that drive, which then brought in Darling, which then brought in Kennedy. No,
good point, Nikki. And I think, West Coast are another team that have been, beset by injuries this year to key players, and they've managed to keep themselves in that position where they're into a prelim final. And I think that, another couple of weeks for Josh Kennedy, and I think that, they'll be, they're a different side when he played. I mean, he didn't play. I mean, you think when we played them, Kennedy didn't play, Lacroix didn't play. I don't think Darling played either, actually, that game. When they've got the big forwards up and running, they're a good side. They'll be hard to beat. I don't think they'll get beaten over there. I think that they'll end up in Melbourne on grand final day. I don't think that either Hawthorn or Melbourne will beat West Coast over there. I'd be quite confident. But I think that if West Coast have to play Richmond in the grand final,
I wonder what the ratings would actually be.
Yeah.
I think it would be one of the lower rating AFL. If that happened, I don't think there's going to be a lot of neutrals that would turn in.
Mind you, aren't they two wins from 2 games at the G this year, West Coast?
Yeah, I think they might be.
The G or in Victoria?
At the G, I think they're 2 from 2 at the G this year.
I'll look it up.
I'm pretty sure I read that somewhere.
Yeah, the other thing I'd like to mention too is, do you reckon Tom Diday would have had as lack of influence on a game in a final as the eventual Rising Star winner did? Come on, mate. Come on, AFL. Jesus Christ.
Yep, 2 wins at the MCG. So they played the Magpies in round 17, and that was 102 to 67.
Oof.
the earlier one was against Carlton,
Right.
which was a 79-69, but that was only in round 5.
Yeah. Okay.
But
So
that latter one, that round 17,
that's a good win, isn't it?
that is a good win.
So they have got some form on the G. So I don't know, stranger things have happened. But if Richmond get past, I think GWS will get past Collingwood, and I think that if Richmond get past GWS, they'll go on and win it. But as I said, I'm just a little bit hopeful that we will spoil the Melbourne party.
That'd be funny. It really would, because you've got some Melbourne powerhouse clubs, Melbourne, Collingwood, and Richmond in that series, and if they all bowed out, and we had an interstate final, that'd be some kind of hilarious. I'd watch just to piss them off.
Yeah.
So obviously this week we've got the knockout finals. We've got the Hawthorn versus Melbourne on the Friday night at the G. I don't think any of us really are on the Hawthorn bandwagon. I've certainly jumped off.
No, I'm going to pick Hawthorn just because just to help us, because we've got that Melbourne pick, so they need to finish lower.
I'm going to go for Hawthorn because they've got actually quite a good record against Melbourne and beat them comfortably when they played them during the year, and I think that they just have a grinding sort of a game that will Melbourne won't be able to withstand. So I'm going to go for the Hawks to bounce back.
Ooh, Donkey, what do you reckon?
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. Also, I think Hawthorn play quite sporadic football. Like they're on 1 week and off the out next, so they're probably a little bit off in that last quarter, and they'll be hurting. And I still think they've got some pretty decent talent. So if they can keep the ball off Melbourne, then they'll outsystem them.
Well, I didn't read that one right. I've gone from being the only one on the Hawks last week to the only one not on them this week. I reckon the D's will be too strong through the midfield. I reckon they've got some real quality workhorses there. And Nick, I think you're right. The only Achilles heel will be kicking a winning score. But if they get enough of the peel, I reckon they'll get over the line. Saturday we've got Collingwood and the Giants. That's a real tasty game if the Giants can get up and bring their A game to the G.
Yeah, quickly, just on the Hawthorn, Stratton out too will hurt them.
It will.
He's a very good footballer. I'm going to go the Giants there. I think Collingwood are a really, really good side, and I think injuries have hurt them. They're another side that have had a difficult year with injury. The 4 sides that have really had difficult years with injury this year, West Coast, Collingwood, GWS, and us. And interesting that those other 3 teams seem to get their way through it. But that's for another day. I think that Collingwood have been a really, really good side this year. I've been really impressed with them. And I think that they've got, they get to their full deck on the park next year. I think they'll be a really, really difficult proposition. But I just got a feeling that GWS have been building, and I think that they'll get past them.
Don't.
I think it's going to be a draw in regular time, and GWS is going to win by 2 goals in overtime.
That's a big call.
You got money on that?
Yeah, that'd pay a bit, I reckon.
That would.
I don't trust the Giants at the G yet. I reckon they've got a real steeliness about them, Pete. You're right. This season, particularly this final series, they showed that against Sydney last week, but. I still like the Maggies at the G, so I'm tipping 2 MCG tenants to win, Collingwood on Saturday and Melbourne on Friday.
I'm with the other boys on Collingwood. I've quite liked the way that they've played, and I think Kelly out is a big hurt for GWS. Even if he does play. I think he'll be restricted, and it's the spaces that I think will get to GWS.
The one thing I reckon GWS suffer from on the G is I reckon Jeremy Cameron sometimes gets a little bit lost. It's a big forward line for him to cover up there, and I reckon sometimes he can be taken out of play just because of the the width of the ground, I should say.
Has he done anything since he's come back from his report?
No, he didn't play. He didn't play bad last week, I didn't think.
He hasn't really been that effective, though.
He kicks his 2 or 3 goals, I think.
Yeah.
The one that's actually, I think, sailing past him is Harry Himmelberg.
I agree.
He's been terrific, and we certainly, Hamish was on. It was, as always, he was on the button when he wanted to pick Harry Himmelberg with the D-Day pick, but he got outbid. So he was right on the money with Harry. Very, very good footballer.
Yep. All right. Well, Nikki, are you ready?
Okay.
So this is a special cockwombling edition of Macca's Sweets and Smacks. Go for it. Two segments that both amount to the same thing in the end.
Well, the one thing I did like was that final between West Coast and Collingwood, because my God, we needed a good game of football. So thank you to both of those teams. Then the cockwomble that's kind of come out of that is, of course, Eddie Maguire, because he can't help himself. Whose dog was that? It was perfect timing. So I think Eddie definitely gets a nomination. My other nomination came out of that game, which is all to do with the commentators. Now, I think that if you are going to commentate on radio or on television, if this is your job, I think they need to do a test at the start of the year that they actually know the rules, that they've actually looked at the rule book and they've read it. Because if they are being on TV or on radio as an expert and they cannot actually know that there is a difference in terms of if a ball hits an umpire when it's near the goals as opposed to it hitting in the ground, which came in, as somebody pointed out, back in 2014, none of the commentators knew that the umpires were actually correct in calling for a score review that the ball was going to hit the post if the umpire hadn't been in the way. They actually got that correct, but most people watching were thinking they got it wrong.
Nikki,
because the commentators kept going, no, they're wrong.
Nikki, you know as well as I do, if it's not on the DVD at the start of the season, then the commentators have got no idea. Because they can't read, they can only watch TV. So,
And even then we know they're not actually watching the vision that's being shown to us. They're looking through binoculars and calling something else. Well, they're just too busy having a chat.
Well, and just on a serious note, even though we're taking the piss a bit, if you were watching the NFL, you would have the commentators in the NFL are there over every freaking connotation of every rule known to man, and that is the most over-officiated sport on the planet. So
they've got a referee and an umpire and 2 judges.
Yeah, they got blokes back in NFL House doing reviews. I mean, we do lack expertise in the commentary. Even the good commentators like McAvaney and whatnot, in terms of knowledgeable. We don't have that expertise, and we deserve better as fans. The AFL is turning into a complex sport. The AFL are trying to make it a more complex sport with the off season and all the rest of it. Channel 7 needs to step up to the plate.
And that's hilarious because you've quoted the NFL and we know that's what Gil idolises. And yet their commentators, they get it right. They really do. They do know all those angles.
Vardy Magic makes a comment about Bartel, and I thought he was excellent, actually. Yeah. No nonsense, he was actually good. And very, very, very good in the way that he spoke. I did like Montagna until he proved himself a proper St Kilda player. Oh, God, there's the culture at that club. The other part of this is... So Gil's idolising of the NFL, bringing in the fucking conference system into the AFLW. No. You've got 10 teams. I'm sorry, you make it a 12-week season. The players themselves have already said they're willing to start playing earlier. So you're not impeding into it. You actually started earlier. You get every team to play each other. And then you have a 2-week final. You have a top 4, done.
not this stupid conference system, because the only reason conferences are in the NFL are because it came historically out of two separate leagues. And there is inequality in the NFL in terms of those conferences. You have one side of it has always been slightly more dominant than the other. So the AFL, well, we've already given it to Gil. He is the cockwomble of the year, but that was just ridiculous.
Just on that, Nikki, and just because, we don't have you on often, so I'll ask, well, how'd you see the Serena Williams thing?
There are very much double standards in relation to her.
Come on.
Oh.
Yes.
No,
there are.
Jesus.
Let it finish. Bullshit. Don't even get started.
Let me finish. There are double standards when it comes to her. She did lose her temper. She did deserve warnings, etc. But the problem becomes that the focus afterwards is then all on her, not on Naomi Osaka, who actually played a brilliant game. And Serena was actually very good at the end. She told the crowd to stop booing.
No, she wasn't. That was self-serving rubbish.
No.
She'd whip the crowd up into a she had to do that. She had a duty to do that because, she'd whip the crowd up into frenzy with her behaviour. It was disgraceful.
Serena has form on this. Serena has form on this. When Stam Souza beat her, she had hissy fits all during that game as well.
What I want to ask is that who was she? If she's standing up for women, who was she standing up for when she threatened a lineswoman in 2009 by saying she was going to stuff a ball down her throat? Who was she sticking up for when she threatened a lineswoman again in 2011, saying that she was ugly on the inside? Right. So she is a brat. She is an entitled brat.
Pretty much most of them are.
No, you don't. No. You don't see Roger Federer act like that. You don't see Novak Djokovic. No.
Oh, yes, Federer has.
Come on.
All Federer has. Federer and Ramos, that chair umpire, Federer has actually threatened that chair umpire as well. Nadal has actually told that chair umpire before, you will never umpire me again. So there is form with a lot of the top players of that particular chair umpire. Federer has as well, and he hasn't had the fines as strongly as others. There was a case of another female, I've forgotten her name, another female tennis player who earlier this year picked up her racket and actually destroyed it on the umpire's chair. Now, she did not get a fine.
It doesn't matter. Do you know what? It doesn't matter one iota, Nikki.
Yeah, because maybe she was on her first warning. Because you actually get a warning. Now she did three.
That should be more than a warning. If you're doing that to the umpire's chair,
it's a code violation. If it's your first one, then it's a warning. That's the rule. Now she had her first warning when she was coaching and she was cheating. Okay, so that was found to be proven because the coach came out and admitted it afterwards. So she was cheating as much as she wanted to deny it. Well, that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter at all. She was doing it and she got a violation and she got a warning. So then she goes and she breaks her racket. Well, then that's the second violation. So she gets her point deducted. Then she goes and calls the umpire a cheat and a liar. So, of course, she gets the third one.
No,
she said
a thief.
Called him a thief.
That's much better, a thief and a liar. And so she gets her third violation. And so it's a graduated thing. And so you can't compare it to another situation unless you actually know whether that was a warning or whether it was a second violation.
I don't watch tennis as much anymore as what I used to. But the problem I've always had with it is that there is a lack of consistency regarding particular players and other things. The whole thing about that coaching, every single one of them do it, and I don't understand why they can't. They should be able to coach their players.
But this is the thing, because
I just think it's ridiculous.
It's been a rule forever. But now because she's been caught out on it, they want to change the rule. It's just ridiculous.
She's one of the best players in the world over the last 20 years. It was a Grand Slam final, and she chucked a massive hissy fit. This is not over the top at all. Like, she needs to take accountability for her actions. She She did this. Nobody else did this. This was nothing to do with whether she was a woman or not. This is to do with she's one of the best players in the world over a long period of time and chucked a massive tanty. If you saw Michael Schumacher get out of his car in his heyday and start punching on with, another driver or, kicking the crap out of one of his, wheel putter on the guys, like it would be a big story too.
So Jamie Whincup, who for years has always had the nickname of Whiner Cup because it was always everybody else's fault, never his.
Yeah, but that's not the point, Nikki. The point is...
Yeah, there's players...
Wait a minute.
Best in the world.
Can I just say... Yeah, and people do lose their cool. Yeah. And they do. And you can understand that. So... Nikki,
she is not a young player playing her first Grand Slam. She is a seasoned veteran, possibly the best female player ever to have played the game. She's won 28-odd Grand Slam titles. She's not entitled to use "I lost my cool" as an excuse. And not only that, she is not entitled to then make it an issue of sexism and discrimination, because that is deflecting from her behaviour.
I will bring up the sexism regarding terminology that's often used, and there is in terms of.
She brought up the fact that she had a daughter, and her daughter shouldn't see her.
Yeah, I did.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. Don't make excuses for it.
I understand where she's coming from there, because you do realise she nearly died.
Give it up. Who gives a shit? I nearly died walking across the road the other day.
Because that comes into her psyche at the moment and where she's at.
No.
She tried to use her status. She tried to use her status as one of the best players in the world, the best player ever in the world.
She was playing badly.
Yeah, and she's playing badly, and she tried to intimidate the referee.
Exactly.
So that's what she tried to do. She tried to use her status to try and intimidate the referee, and then when and because something didn't go her way, she tucks a tanty and calls him a thief. And then when there's backlash, it's suddenly sexism. I am all over stamping that kind of crap out in sport when it's there. But people doing this sort of behaviour and pulling it actually makes it harder for everybody else who's trying to do the right thing.
Exactly. And there would have been, hundreds of tennis-playing women all over the world thinking, well, shit, I've got a daughter, and that doesn't excuse me if I behave like that. Serena Williams is supposedly the figurehead of women's tennis and arguably women's sport, and she can't hold herself together when she's playing badly well enough to actually carry herself with some grace against a player who's playing in her first Grand Slam final, who won her first Grand Slam tournament. Serena Williams should be handing over her runners-up check to that player and saying, here you go, I owe you this because I've taken all your publicity and probably cost you a fortune in endorsements. It's just a joke. You can't defend it, Nikki. I'm sorry. It's indefensible.
Look, I haven't seen all of it, and that's my problem in being able to talk about it, because I didn't watch all the game. I've only seen bits and pieces, and you get different information coming from all over the other ways. So it is very hard to make a judgment, but I do know she has dealt with some other things that have been quite strong in terms of a double standard.
We all deal with shit.
Respect to her and others.
We all deal with shit. And she's got millions of dollars in the bank and 28 Grand Slam titles in her pocket, so she should be able to deal with it a little bit better than most, Nikki.
Look, the majority of the time she does handle herself with grace, so...
That's because she's winning. Anyway, what else have we got?
Moving along.
I knew that'd get a rise.
So who's that cockerel ball?
Nikki, for defending Serena Williams.
No, she's not in the AFL.
How about Terry Wallace and Damien Barrett for saying that we wouldn't get more than a high second for Mitch McGovern, and that McGovern had some dirt if he didn't get drafted and all this sort of crap.
Yeah, that'll do.
Trying to undermine the Crows in their bid to get a half-decent South Australian lad in the draft. Just goes on. Anyway, Nikki, who is it?
Well, the AFL's kind of won it overall.
As they always do.
I thought the commentators, though, oh God, they shitted me off.
All right.
I mean, and Channel 7.
Why don't we
the
just make
commentary.
it? We'll just make it an all played well. What do you reckon? Anyway, look, that wraps us up for tonight. A little bit shorter than usual, but obviously no Crows to talk about. Don't forget, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, aflcrowcast.com as well. We're in the process of revamping our website. We have a new member section there now. There's a forum going up. There's going to be tons of other things happening on our website over the summer months. So check it out every now and again and see how we're going. Obviously, you can listen to our podcasts and watch our podcast video feeds on our website as well. No Sunday Wrap, obviously, as usual, but we'll be back next Tuesday for Tuesday Night Live. We did get a bit of an apology from Macca. I didn't have time to read it, but thankfully he's okay, and we'll be back next week as well. Donkey, thanks very much for joining us. Nikki, thank you very much for joining us again for a bit of a blast from the past on Tuesday Night Live. And Pete, as always, thanks for keeping us on the straight and narrow, mate. Thanks everyone on Facebook and Spreaker. We will see you next Tuesday.